Hello, everyone, and welcome to an incredibly important conversation today on Data for Good. My name is Nicola Corzine, and I'm the founding CEO, Executive Director of the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. We are a nonprofit committed to building a better path forward for entrepreneurs worldwide. If this is your first time, welcome. We're delighted to have you here. And if you're joining us back again, it's so nice to see you. Now, we have a truly incredible program lined up today. But before we get started on that, a few things I want to cover. First and foremost, you may have seen in that chat window, we have a big pledge and commitment right now towards mentorship. In fact, it's not just for the moment, it is for our lifetime. We know our entrepreneurs are tackling big problems out in the world, and we believe in the criticality of making sure that you have access to experts who can help you tackle those problems with real-time responsive support. So if you haven't yet become a part of the movement and you'd like to gain additional mentorship support, we'd love to encourage you to sign up. And if you have capacity to give, if you have subject matter expertise that you'd like to share on to other entrepreneurs who are doing important work in the world, we'd love to invite you to join us as well in the moment. Sign up today at mentormakers.com. Now, along with all of this, we also realize and recognize that none of the work that the center does would be possible without our generosity of our incredible sponsors and donors. So to all of them who give so generously to our mission, thank you. It goes such a long way to our entrepreneurs who are working around the world. Finally, I want to take a moment to say this is a live Q&A driven type of conversation. It's not meant to be us talking at you. We want you to be a part of this. So if you have questions throughout today, please make sure you use that active Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Pop in those questions and we'll try to get to just as many as we can. Now, before I get started with introducing our incredible panel, I want to take a time to just slow down and check in on how you are all doing today. Since the start of the pandemic, we have wanted to make sure that as our entrepreneurs are faring very difficult and challenging times, we know how you're doing and we're able to orient our conversations and our courses to that. So I'm going to launch a really quick poll and just invite you to reflect. How are you doing right now? We know these market conditions are never easy to navigate through, and certainly not the ones unfolding around us. So we'd like to say, however you are, whatever is showing up for you in this moment, we appreciate you doing the work that you're doing, and we're also here for you. Understandably, we always see a good amount of healthy optimism out there, but rightfully so. A lot of anxiety and just honestly holding on and feeling like you're surviving right now. Thank you for all of you being very transparent with us today and for sharing that reflection. I'm going to end the poll and also share those results, just again, so that you can know you're not alone in the challenges that you're facing. Now, I'm going to launch another poll a little later on, but for now, let's take a moment to just welcome to stage our incredible panel joining us. I'm joined today by Jill Johnson, Terry Irwin, Meg Small, and Riaz Ghassayeddin, all of them experts in their fields. Welcome all of you. Rather than even attempt to do justice to your incredible backgrounds, I'm going to invite each of you to take maybe 30 seconds to share a little bit about how you came to this stage today and your work in the world. So maybe we'll start with Jill.
Thanks so much for this opportunity to be here. I'm really glad to share the stage, if you will, with so many amazing folks and organizations. My name is Jill Johnson. I'm the co-founder and CEO of the Institute for Entrepreneurial Leadership. We're an organization, a nonprofit based in Newark, New Jersey, and our focus is on eradicating the systemic barriers that exist that prevent people from historically excluded populations from being able to create entrepreneurial wealth.
Amazing. Jill, your work is always so inspiring. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Terry, let's go to you next. Welcome.
Hi, I'm really pleased to be here with everyone today. My name, as Nicola said, is Terry Irwin, and I'm the former head of the School of Design at Carnegie Mellon University, where I'm still a professor in the Faculty of Design. I'm also the director of the Transition Design Institute, but I'm not a lifelong academic. For most of my career, I was a professional designer, and I was a founder and partner and creative director in a large international design firm called Meta Design. We had offices in San Francisco, Berlin, London, and Zurich. Now my area of focus is really conducting transition design research. And transition design is an approach for addressing complex wicked problems. That's a term used in design. And those are problems like a lack of funding for minority entrepreneurs, poverty, forced migration, any kind of systems problem like that. And part of the approach involves gathering data. And that was our role in the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center project with all these great folks.
Tori, it's so amazing to have you with us today. Thank you for sharing and for joining us. Meg, welcome. Good to see you as always. Would you like to share a little bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. Thank you also for having me on this exciting panel. I'm really happy to be here. So my name is Meg Small. I'm a faculty member in the College of Health and Human Development at Penn State and the Director for Social Impact in the Evidence to Impact Collaborative. So 2 impact words there, which I think says a lot about sort of my interests. Traditionally, I come from the field of public health. I'm a biostatistician by training, and then just got really frustrated with how much data we were collecting and how little of it was being used to have impact in the real world. So my work here at Penn State is to not just generate new information, but to translate what we already know more effectively into practice, whether that's in the public sector or in the public sector into policy. So that's a lot of how I spend my time. And I've been fortunate to work with many of the people on this panel, but with the NASDAQ Center for a couple of years now, thinking about how do we use data to help entrepreneurs flourish in this current environment. Thank you.
Meg, we're so grateful you're doing this work in the world and that you've got double impact tied all over you. That's a good thing for us. Riaz, welcome. It is such a treat to have you with us today as well. Your work is always inspiring, but would you take just a few seconds to share a little bit about your background too?
Of course. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to wherever everyone is. First of all, thank you to the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center, Nicola and team for hosting. I'm really excited to be with Terry, Meg, and Jill today. My name is Riaz Gaisadine. I use he, him pronouns, and I have the privilege of being the Vice President of Program and Talent at Camelback Ventures, which is a US-based nonprofit where we work tirelessly to increase access to opportunity for entrepreneurs of color and women by investing in their leadership and their ventures, but we also advocate for fairness and funding. I come to this conversation and the work that we do to combat the data that's out there with especially our BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, women, and non-binary entrepreneurs. Because at Camelback, we believe that genius is equally distributed, but opportunity is not.
One of my favorite quotes of all time. Okay, so we're gonna have a very interesting and engaging conversation on data. I know that doesn't always happen, but that is going to be our aim for today. Meg, I'm going to throw it up to you to get started. First, with the ask of ground us a little bit in data, because speaking of buzzy words and things that can often get lost and cloaked behind all kinds of incentives, I'd love to know how you're defining data as we start. And then I would love to say, what have you seen right now that's really changing the data models, traditional work out there? What is innovative? What is actually making a difference? And how have they created real impact, to use that perfect word again, in the world?
Yeah, thank you. So I think of data very, very broadly. I think of data simply as the systematic gathering of information, and it can take lots of forms. The data that we think about is really only as good as the confidence it gives decision makers, right? So as we think about it, we are always trying to look at not just a single quote unquote data point, or not just in quantitative data, which I think that's where a lot of people go when they hear the word data, is to numbers and binary and graphs and charts. But where can we really, what we call triangulating, where can we look at quantitative, qualitative, deep dive data, et cetera? How do we get ourselves in the strongest position to have the most confidence to, as I tell my students, to be right more often than we're going to be wrong, right? I use just sort of funny shorthands like, well, are we in a situation where if we act on this information, it's better than a coin toss? Like, how confident are we feeling? So that's sort of how I define data. In terms of one of the higher impact sort of initiatives, big initiatives that we've worked with, I would have to say that the first thing that comes to mind is results first. And there's a link. It was initially started in Washington State, but then the Pew Charitable Trust really sort of grew it into a multi-state effort. And I'll tell you just quickly a little bit about it. There's, as many people probably know, universities produce a lot of research. We do a lot of evaluation in social policy areas like healthcare, education, juvenile justice, et cetera. But we often don't collaborate on data projects. So for instance, we might be evaluating a project and another university might be evaluating the same project, and 3 years later, it shows up in a peer-reviewed journal and it never really has impact out in states or children's or families' lives. So what we did was we took all of the research studies that were looking at similar programs in education, reading interventions, in healthcare, substance abuse, mental health prevention, juvenile justice, et cetera. And we put all the data together in a really systematic way to try to figure out what is the effect of these programs, very specific programs. And we put that in a database. And then what we did was we allowed states to come in and put their own contextual data in. So here's the other thing. When we do all this research, sometimes it happens in communities that are similar and sometimes very different from the ones that where people want to take action, where they want to actually use and implement a program or a service. So what we allowed states to do was to go in and put in things like, what is the rate of high school graduation? How many children in this community aren't literate by grade 3? What is the rate of incarceration? What is, name your indicator? You put that all in the database in the model, and then it runs, the algorithms on the back end run a cost benefit analysis that help you match up the best programs for the type of situation that you have on the ground. So you're not just implementing what's quote unquote an evidence-based or research-based program, you're actually able to see if we invest so much in this program and offer it to so many people in this community, we're likely to see a return in cost savings on healthcare expenditures or a decrease in economic activity because of lower graduation rates, et cetera. So that was sort of a fairly sophisticated data-driven model, but we turned it into a tool that state policymakers are actually using. And to date, and I checked this, the latest figure is, I think that we've been able to influence and reallocate over $1 billion of taxpayer dollars into programs that had a higher impact and a better return on investment. So it's what we call evidence-based policymaking.
I love that example, and that collaboration and that purpose-driven action of utilization of data is so important. And not to mention the nice thing that happens when carrots are given more than sticks. Riaz, I'm gonna invite you to sort of weigh in here a little bit on some of the incredible work happening over at Camelback. How are you seeing some of these innovative models emerge, and what's inspiring you at the Data Lens right now?
Yeah, I think kind of building off of what Meg was sharing, sometimes data isn't always rocket science. It's there, it's with us, and it's how you use it. Camelback has been around since 2015. We've had over 110 fellows, 95% identify as BIPOC, 60% identify as women and non-binary who've completed our program. 2/3 of them have hit their fundraising goals. And as an organization ourselves, we've we've invested over $5 million in direct investments to these companies. And they have raised or earned over $109 million after the fellowship. I think when you look at those numbers, it's like, wow, that's incredible. And this data does confirm, what we've always known to be true at Camelback, that there isn't a pipeline problem when it comes to BIPOC women and non-binary entrepreneurs. And we believe that they are successful, even more successful sometimes than their white and male counterparts. But even though our BIPOC women and non-binary fellows have been finding success, and we started this work really at a grassroots level, our data that we were showing was showing that our fellows and entrepreneurs of color, women and non-binary folks are still getting outraised 3 to 1 by their white male counterparts in the same industry, in the same fields. And so that led us to really think about the data a bit more and look more into it and realize that our BIPOC women and non-binary entrepreneurs were being left behind. And honestly, it's due to bias that was contributing to this, that these entrepreneurs weren't able to get their foot in the door. We found that only 4% of the $76 billion that were given out in 2019 by foundations went to Black and Brown entrepreneurs, even though Black and Latina communities represent 29% of the population. We also found that 76% of foundation staff identify as white, and white Americans in general, their social network is 91% white. So therefore, they're giving money to folks that look like them. And our whole focus and idea was to shift the amount of money that is going to BIPOC communities and founders. So we use this data to help funders really think about their numbers and how to grow their numbers and how to move more money to invest into BIPOC women and non-binary folk. And we also found that a vast majority of these funders had no idea about their own numbers. And so given all of this, it led us to want to directly work with white identifying individuals in philanthropy to be co-conspirators and to disrupt and dismantle systems that lead to unfair funding, which has been really exciting work. We're now in year 3 of that. We're seeing a lot of success. And I think one other thing I'll mention, another team that we have is our Search and Align team that has thought about how do we collect data with an equity mindset. Our Search and Align team is our recruitment and selection team, where we aim for folks to search for folks who are best aligned, but what we can offer them and what they can offer us. And during this application process for the fellowship, we try to ask appropriate amount of questions to collect data at that time. So it's not cumbersome, it isn't irrelevant. We've also made design changes like incorporating video responses instead of written, so we get better buy-in from entrepreneurs, ease the burden, and allow them to show up more authentically. And I think these two teams, our Capital Collaborative team and our Search and Align team, are two examples of how we use data models to improve the work that we do to inevitably have a stronger impact on the communities we serve.
That's so inspiring. And I think, again, it just speaks volumes to the incredible impact that's being delivered and felt across communities, and others can learn from and hopefully use that as a way to inspire other organizations too. Now, Jill, I know this is data, broadly speaking, has been something that you have been around and have cautioned people about in a number of ways as well. How do you think about data in this conversation, both the good and perhaps a little bit of the bad?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the data is important, right? It's very important and necessary to know the starting point. But I think it's really important for people to make sure that we're asking the right questions and collecting the right data, right? And making sure that even when we collect data that we think is the right data, that we're pushing back and making sure that we are understanding the difference between causation and correlation. And I think that there are some stats that kind of we're putting out there and backing up with data that I think could have a different causation than what people even think. So even around this issue of access to capital, we keep kind of pushing forth data points that show how great these entrepreneurs are. We all know this by now. So, we need to understand and look at why is it that despite the data is showing this, that people are still not investing. And sometimes it's easier to just keep on putting forth more data and doing more studies rather than face the cold, hard facts and truths about why we have these things happening.
You're teeing it up perfectly to something that I think is a very real thing out there, and that is, a little bit of worry of, is this just data fatigue? So Meg, I want to come back to you for a moment and say, you've been around this, obviously you've already shared with us, data is only as good as the actions that it can actually inspire, right? So what do you think strategically about the questions that leaders should be asking, both to ensure that the data collected is going to lead to positive change, and also how to make sure that it's really doing the best chance of seeing it live out in the world?
Yeah, well, thanks. And I really agree with everything that the other panelists, Jill and Riaz, have shared as well. And let me just start to reinforce what they've said is, the data are only good as the questions that you ask and the we would call these sort of the areas, domains, constructs that you cover. And I think to Riaz's point, and maybe to Jill's as well, my colleague Yoon Her did an interesting analysis that showed part of the difference between, some of the funding levels is completely unexplained by any of the variables that we have in a data set, which means there's a whole set, we have quantitatively now shown there's a whole set of factors out there that we don't even have data on that must be explaining some of this. So I think we can use data and think about the quality of the data that we have as saying there's a big gap. Like, where do we not know things and why do we not know this? What are these other factors? The one thing that I appreciate and all the work that we've been doing collaboratively with the center across a number of projects is that bringing in folks from outside of traditional sort of entrepreneurial business research spaces, colleges of health and human development, for instance, or other types of folks, liberal arts, et cetera, I think can really help us get new sets of things to look at, other indicators. Going directly into the communities that are impacted and that are working on these issues is incredibly important. I mean, thinking that we're going to come up with the right answers or even the right questions in, sort of in a centralized or academic environment or by experts is not the way to go. We really have to listen qualitatively to the lived experiences of the people who are living the problem and the stakeholders that are experiencing the problem. And I look to Terry and her work who do this, day in, day out. In terms of now I'm going to sort of switch more to sort of a business hat or an entrepreneurial hat, just in terms of the types of data, right? I think I put data sort of in these three buckets for decision makers. And again, only as good as the confidence it inspires. And right now I'd say we don't have a lot of confidence that we can make some big decisions here based on the gaps that we've seen in our own data. But if you're running a business, you can use data, or I think data can be used in sort of three different ways. The first one is like big data sets can point to these sort of large problems, especially in the social spaces that need to be solved, right? So I'll give one quick example that we're seeing sort of nationally is that rates of mental health, access to mental health services are decreasing at the same time that the prevalence of mental health problems is increasing. Why is that? That, Terry, looks like a wicked problem, right? We need to really investigate to see why is there, this might be a social problem that needs to be solved. There could be some innovative solutions there. The second is more at the micro level when you're launching a new product and you're testing prototypes. I know a lot of people probably watching have products or services that are, maybe in the MVP stage, the minimum viable product, or maybe even sort of in the prototype stage. It's like, how much data do we have qualitatively? You want to go deep with the user. Maybe it's an extreme user to get feedback about what you're designing. And that's a very different data environment. But I always tell my students when we're running design sprints and the other folks that I collaborate with in the private sector, do you have enough data to be sure you're making it better and not just different, right? So part of it is sort of a gut check on, like, oh, okay, I think we have enough data to say if we made this design change, it would make our product service experience better. And then the third one is scaling. And this is really, I think, the hardest data to get, but it is one that you need when you're making decisions about launching a product service policy, is how do we watch it perform over time, right? So what kinds of data can we get? And again, to Riaz's point, I think we're always concerned about burden. So what data can you access passively through user experience? Can you use qualitative data, big data? There's tools now. We would love to use a lot more qualitative data than we can. There's just, until recently, haven't been efficient ways to synthesize it. But now with AI tools, listening, one example in the public policy space, we use Quorum, and we can listen in on legislators' conversations, like what they post on social media. We can look at their legislation that they offer, et cetera, and we get a sense as to where their thinking is on these different issues. And we can do it with, some of those AI tools that are publicly available. So those are the three things. I think in the beginning to find a problem, in the middle to design a solution, and then at the end to scale efficiently.
I love that. And it is an important part to then realize, so we have it all, and now what? And I think, Jill, I'd love to turn the and now what a little bit to you, because so much of data is in the narrative that is shaped around that data, right? And really making sure that we are protecting those that have trusted us to give us this data in the first place. How do you actually think about the role that the narrative plays in the data capturing and storytelling part of it? And then how do you kind of think through conveying really truly the value of either the entrepreneur or the product or service that lives behind the collection of that intel in the first place, really to make sure that we've got the attention of the right people through the process?
So I think storytelling is enormously important. I think that a lot of times people can separate in their minds the data from the human element, the data from the people. And even when we talk about the lack of access to capital, this is a problem that's going to take a long time to solve. When you hear the stories of real life, everyday entrepreneurs, and you understand how they are struggling day to day. And so that this solving the problem over some period of time is not at all helpful to them, because their business will be out of business by the time any problem is solved. It's not a problem that kind of exists out there just in, the universe somewhere. It is contextualized and actualized when you hear those stories from the entrepreneurs. I also think that when it comes to data, we need to be mindful of who needs to hear which elements of the data, right? So, in even talking about the historical bias and exclusion that has happened for Black and Brown entrepreneurs, that's not a story that Black and Brown entrepreneurs need to hear, and be forced to kind of listen to, and having that story retold and reliving, their experience, etc. That's the story that the people who have not placed an emphasis and been intentional about including them, that's the story that they need to hear. So, even when we have kind of these DEI conversations, that really has to be separated into the, here's kind of the basic level, and let's make sure everyone has the foundation of it before we have the real conversation. And then let's bring everyone together and talk about the solutions, so that we're not, continuing to tell the people who already know the problems that becomes very frustrating. So, I think that having people share their stories in a very real and authentic way can help to level set where the conversation needs to start when everyone is together.
I love that. And it's so true and so important that the lived experience often is perhaps the most critical part of our role in protecting as we gather data, as we seek to understand it. And honestly, as we're also parsing out who needs to hear that data, right? It's not always a one size fits all approach. It's never a one size fits all approach in that dialogue. Terry, there was actually a great question that came into the Q&A that I'm gonna tease into this next conversation with you. You are all around design. You spent your whole life in design, being inspired by it, realizing that there's so much more that we can do with it when we think through that lens of design. And also realizing that as wonderfully intentioned as people are in the field, we're all a little biased as we enter into it with our own experiences that don't then create the most perfect platforms from which we can gather really unbiased data. So two-part question. You teach this now. What do you wish was being developed and designed for that doesn't yet exist? And also what platforms and opportunities are working right now or doing a pretty good job of inviting others to contribute data into, and platforms that are helping the cause, if you will?
Yeah, that's a great question, Nicola. I think design has evolved a lot in the past few decades, and many people out there may have heard of these terms user-centered design or human-centered design. So I think for a while, designers have been gathering data about people and their experiences and their preferences. But I think when it comes to these large, wicked, complex problems, no single discipline or no single group of people can solve those. So the only way to begin to address those, and we have to keep in mind that complex, wicked problems took a long time to become complex, and they will take a long time to resolve. So the continuity for the solutioning process that has to happen over long arcs of time must reside within the system. So we look at the problem and all of the different varied groups connected to it as a system with systems dynamics. And I think Jill was touching on this. The concerns and the power relations among all these different groups are very different. So what we as outside consultants or people that are gathering data need to do is understand all of the different concerns, hopes, desires, and visions for the future that these different groups have. So what the transition design approach attempts to do, and I think increasingly designers are becoming more concerned with, is creating a systems view of the problem. the researchers that coined the term wicked problem, one of the characteristics, the chief characteristics they cite, is that wicked problems are comprised of multiple stakeholders with conflicting agendas and no clear shared understanding of the problem. Sometimes they can't even agree on what the problem is, let alone how to solve it. So what our research attempts to do is understand where these stakeholder groups are in conflict, where their agendas are in opposition to each other. But even more importantly, it tries to tease out where there may be unexpected areas of alignment and agreement, because that is really the low-hanging fruit in the system. You can leverage those areas of agreement to begin working on effective action in the short term, while you also identify these areas of opposition that are what makes the problem stuck. But the other important thing we're trying to talk to our students about is flipping the model, where the outside designer or the outside architect, or we've all had this experience perhaps in the medical profession, where this outside expert is coming in, they're studying things for a minute, and then they're presuming to create a solution that gets imposed upon the system. What we say is no, outside consultants must come to that system in a posture of service. And our job is to figure out what each group needs. With some, it will be empowering disenfranchised groups. With others, it will be educating them, or, really talking to them, as Jill suggests, about unacknowledged bias and systems of racism, frankly. But that is work that you bring to help amplify and bring resources to the system, because the knowledge for how to solve a problem always resides within the system. So rather than designers being the bringers of solutions, our job is to gather data and facilitate the amplification of that knowledge, and that is what informs the tangible solutions that the designers create. But that really flips the model on its head, because it presumes the expertise already resides there. We just have to help each group achieve an even ground so that productive dialogue can take place.
And I love that, Terry. That was, rightfully shared frustration that was coming up in the chat around, we do so much collection of data and then nothing happens. And I think what was really fascinating going through the process with transition design was, well, obviously dream state, the problem is solved. It's gone away. It's no longer a wicked problem territory. We start by realizing the near-term interventions that can have a positive effect for continuing that incredible trend of getting rid of this problem once and for all. And it does that through the lens of the stakeholders directly themselves, and finding alignment with such what feels like tension-driven thoughts, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think the transition design approach also argues that anytime we create a solution, it's predicated upon an often unstated assumption that we are going to transition from the problematic present to some desired future state. But we so often fail to have all these different groups specify the future that they want if the problem were resolved. So part of what our data gathers is these different future visions to look at where they are in alignment or opposition, because every solutioning cycle really just acts as a step on a transition pathway toward the preferred future, which is hopefully sustainable, equitable, and desirable for all of the stakeholders involved.
I love that. To the good question on tools, I mean, and I'd love to open this up for the group's thoughts on this too, because we all have used different tools, the good, bad, and the ugly in that process as we go through. But I think there's certainly an emergence of even more tools, it feels like, on a daily basis that helps you think about gathering data. I would say it's meeting the needs of where the data needs to be gathered and being thoughtful around how we collect it. One thing, that the center has learned along the way is we really are trying to build programs for our entrepreneurs based on what their biggest struggles are. And so asking them at different moments in time, asking all of you at different moments of time, what are your challenges? And then, being quiet and listening that. Sometimes that comes up in surveying, as you'll see. Thank you for all of you who fill out those surveys, much appreciated. Sometimes it will come up in just, simple polling that we're doing here. A lot of the time it comes up in conversation. And a lot of the time we are actively seeking new and creative ways to gather that feedback. And I would say always, as with everything in data, one size never is going to fit all. So realizing that at different moments and different times, different tools need to be applied that work within the construct of the user group. And user group isn't even a terrible way of putting it, but within the individuals that you're trying to better understand and support. Inside of transition design, I got a chance to, I'm not even going to pretend to say be good at, but navigate somewhat successfully through Miro. And that was a really fun way to kind of gather and lay out thoughts and try to do it both asynchronously and then within the group as well. So those are just a few ideas from me. I don't know if anyone else has other tools that they're falling in love with or like right now around how to gather data from different individuals. Anything come to mind that works well? Challenges that have been faced with tools?
Well, I'll just build on for a moment what you said, Nicola. I mean, like most of us, we have employed techniques where you go out into the field and maybe you interview people or you gather data, but the people responding are more or less working alone. They're thinking about what to offer up. We have found that when people are placed in a collaborative environment, and more like a brainstorm, with Post-its, and they can see what other people are putting down on the board, it jumpstarts systems thinking. And I think it makes everyone more prolific. And so I personally think we need to develop more tools around that, where you're leveraging group think. And you're firing different synapses when you're in a group versus alone.
I love that. Really cool. Really cool. All right. Well, Riaz, I'm going to come back to you because I've got a couple of questions that we've heard time and time again from a number of different stakeholders. We know that we can really learn a lot from the lived experience, but we also know that there is a very, very fine line. Jill's commented on this, Mike's commented on it, Terry's reflected on this already, that goes from helpful to harmful when it really comes to collecting sensitive data and sensitive subject information. Can you help us think through specifically what kind of next steps we can take to ensure that personal data collected isn't being used harmfully against groups that are already disadvantaged because of systemic inequities?
Yeah, definitely. I like these questions. It's really exciting for me to sit back and think, because I think when you boil it down, it's probably not challenging, but the way we operate, we create a lot of different obstacles for ourselves. I think for the first part of where do we draw the line? I think the first thing I think about, if you're a data holder, a data seeker, is to ask yourself, why am I collecting this data and who is it benefiting? Sounds simple, I know. And if you're unsure of why you're collecting and you're collecting it for your own personal benefit, that's harmful. Now, if you're collecting it with a purpose agreed upon by the community you're serving and have a clear outcome of how it will benefit the community you're serving, I think that's helpful. I think it's important to not make assumptions as a data holder, data collector, of what you think is best for the community, or put your own values and beliefs ahead of what the community wants. Honestly, they know what's best for them. Ask them. Trust them, know that they know what is best for them. Honestly, more than likely, it's not you. At Camelback, we do collect sensitive information like gender identity, sexual orientation, even their financials. And when we do these requests, we share who's going to see it, how they're going to use it. We're very transparent about what the data is going to be used for. And we also share that, we're going to store it in a very secure place. It's going to be having access from X, Y, and Z. In terms of that second question, what steps can we take to ensure that the personal data we collect is not being used against groups or people who are already disadvantaged because of systemic inequities? I think there are 4 things that come top of mind for me. The first is to build genuine and trusting relationships with the community you're working with. It takes intention, it takes time, it takes energy. It's not just built out of thin air. And I think a lot of times, especially with white communities, because they know each other, the trust may already be there. But many of the communities we serve are Black, brown, queer. They've been harmed. They've had a lot of trauma, especially by the people who are trying to collect the data. So therefore, it's not a given thing that trust is already there. So you have to be really intentional. The second thing I think about is creating really clear agreements of what can and cannot be shared between the data collectors and the seekers, the community, and the public. An agreement that I like, if you're in conversation and you're trying to qualitatively collect data, is what is said here stays here, but what is learned here leaves here. And that's something we use a lot at Camelback. And make sure your language is accessible for the community you're working with. Is it translated in the appropriate language? Don't use any jargon. The third thing I think about is once you have agreements and they've been created, you have to over communicate and seek permission from the individuals within that community. Don't assume just because with the community, it's good to go. When you're having interactions, communicate with everyone. Do they agree to this? Do they understand how the data is going to be used and shared? Do it verbally, written. Not everyone, has email. Like, how are you getting it out to make sure there's agreement? And fourth, use data for good. Again, it sounds simple, but it's not. Don't sensationalize experiences. Be objective. Don't add your own color or spin to what the data is or what is being shared. And I hope just these 4 steps are easy to adapt and implement in anyone's organization when working with communities that are different from how you are.
Oh, yes, that is gold. It's so good. Thank you. And the simplicity is in the art of actually being able to apply it and hold them true as those 4 truths. We can absolutely do that. Terry, I'm going to come back to you just for a moment, because obviously a lot of the time researchers are out in the field, designers out in the field trying their best, but they've got limited lived experience directly themselves. So how do you think that they could utilize data collection to create inclusive products in those spaces where they may not have that direct lived experience?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I'm going to refer back to the transition design workshop we ran as part of the NASDAQ Center project. So the last step that the stakeholder groups undertook was to propose solutions to the wicked problem of a lack of funding for minority entrepreneurs. So we had, I think, 4 or 5 different stakeholder groups looking at that problem from different perspectives, all contributing a wealth of ideas, which we consider data. And then what we do is we analyze those and sort of collect them into a very large database. But we also do a thing called affinity mapping and clustering, which is native to the design professions. So what we're doing is we're looking for solution ideas that all groups contributed to. So you can actually begin to analyze where there's consensus among all these different groups for what solutions might work. And when we ran the workshop, amazingly, data was one of the chief areas that everyone agreed was problematic and where solutions need to be contributed. They agreed that there wasn't enough data, or the data was being skewed, or the narratives that arose out of the data were not inclusive, or, as Jill pointed out, being aimed at the wrong people. So what we've done is try to come up with a step-by-step process where we're using that database of solutions proposed by stakeholders themselves, and we're trying to create what we call ecologies of systems interventions, where you have different solutions that are connected to each other, and they're situated in different sectors or levels of scale, so that together they have more traction to sort of destabilize things. It doesn't mean the solutions are the same, but it means they're complementary. And then those ecologies can ideally be vetted back to the stakeholders themselves. So what you're entering into is a radically collaborative co-design process where we designers are taking the ideas from the system and helping shape it so that they are truly systemic solutions in the way they connect to each other.
That's good. That's really good. All right. The topic of hand is one now that unfortunately we've all had the direct experience of. Meg, I'm coming to you next. It's around data privacy and the breaches of data privacy and the very rightful worry of data privacy, what it even can mean in our world these days. How do you think we enter into data collection knowing that data privacy is a challenge on the best of days, that we can do better in this instance and really think thoughtfully through around cybersecurity, very real worries?
Yeah, that's something that is a daily topic in the Evidence to Impact Collaborative here. You know, speaking to the other panelists' points, which I completely agree, there are things that we can do under the principles we call community participatory research to communicate the why this is being collected, and then to also make sure that they understand that they are going to get something back from this. It's not just an extraction technique, that we are actually going to share the learning, which I love that, the learning leaves, with the community intentionally. Because they're giving us their time. Anyone that responds to a survey or does direct data collection is giving us their time. They're giving us pieces of themselves, you know, so we have to be stewards of that, responsible stewards. And part of that comes with the relationships that we form with the folks we're collecting data from and giving it back to. And then part of it is, what do we actually do with it in sort of a digital environment? Because now, you know, almost all of our data is collected and stored digitally. From a university perspective, I mean, we're fortunate to have the resources to have very secure data systems. We apply for and get certified. You know, we have like an NIST sort of level of security from the federal government. I'm not even getting some of these things right, but we've invested a lot in our infrastructure to house sensitive information. It does not guarantee that there won't be a breach, right? And so we have to be very transparent. So I would say what we do and the way we think about it is, what can we do, you know, up to the point of getting and storing the data to make sure that that is as safe as possible. And that means all kinds of safety, right? Safety about how the people feel about how they're giving us the data, all the way into when we get it. How do we keep it as secure with identifiers? We try to de-identify as much as we possibly can, but where we have to link things to accelerate the learning, we do, but we're very specific about not keeping names, sensitive information alongside, you know, people's data, health data, HIPAA compliant data, et cetera. So we're very specific about how that data gets stored. But then I think on the, you know, on the side that no one likes to think about, what if there is a breach, right? What do you do? What plan do you have in place? What risk management plan do you have in place a priori to make sure that you do everything to mitigate that damage? Communicate, repair, and restore trust as quickly as you possibly can. So I would say transparency is the name of the game in this environment, that we share everything that we're doing. We're completely transparent. And as soon as the problem happens, we are out in front of it, communicating with the folks that have been impacted by that problem.
We've had a couple of questions that have come in, Jill, around women entrepreneur of color. The first is really squarely in the project work that we've all been working on over the last year plus now. We know there's a gap in access to capital. Can you talk through from your perspective how you think data collection can support them in gaining funding, directly funding, not just talking about funding, actually gaining funding? And then specifically from a person watching on YouTube, they wanted to know, is there a sensitivity to this? The specific individual is helping serve underserved communities of young adults. And she wants to know, how do I use data to support my own financial strategy? Like, is that a tension that I should be aware of when I'm trying to use data to help advance my own access to raising more capital out in the market? How would you address both of those questions? Both what's missing in the data conversation around raising of capital for women of color, and then specifically from someone on that spectrum that's having a bit of a challenge right now and thinking about how data can help advance her conversation success in getting that capital for her.
Yeah, so I'm going to say something that may sound like really radical, And a lot of people may disagree, but I've been thinking about this a lot recently. We've had our Women of Color Connecting Roadshow that the Venture Equity Project has supported. And something that was kind of just an aha moment to me a few weeks ago really is kind of moving away from this thought that access to capital is somehow a meritocracy, that the best people are getting access to capital. And, when you ask the question, how can data support more people getting capital? There's been so much data at this point that suggests that shows, that proves that people are willing to ignore the data and invest the way that they've continued to invest for years and years and years, ignoring all the data that says that investing across more people and in a more diverse way produces higher returns, all of that good stuff. And so, really my position at this point is more data is not going to lead to greater access to capital. That the real issue here, the way that we view it, is around the connectivity, the connectivity that people have to each other. People invest in people who they know, like, and trust, right? And Riaz talked a lot about the importance of that trust factor. Well, if the people who have the resources and who can open doors and who can provide capital, don't have those meaningful relationships with the people who need the capital, and vice versa, if the people who need the capital don't have those relationships. And we know that just again in our personal relationships, Riaz pointed to a statistic earlier that Riaz, most white people, 91% of their network is all white, right? So that's where it starts. If you don't know anyone who's different from you, it's unlikely that you're really going to invest in anyone who's different from you in more than some sort of a marginal way, here's my social responsibility thing, so I'll put a couple of dollars over here. But you're not looking at your investment strategy and the opportunities that you seek in these other places, because those are not your networks. Those are not your, that's not your community. And I, want to point out, there's nothing that is surreptitious about this. There's nothing, this is human nature, right? We all gravitate to people who seem to be like us. It's human nature. But we kind of draw these distinctions along color lines, as if just because we're the same color, race, or, gender identification, that somehow we're going to be the same. And that's just not true. And that's the reason that, it just requires more of us getting to know each other, building those relationships. And then that is the starting point for access to capital. So I just don't feel at this point like more data is really going to push the needle on access to capital.
I unfortunately start to believe that is very much the case still. And, I think that hurts the heart a little to a certain degree, right? Because I think all of us are like, well, if there was only that silver bullet to a certain degree where it could be the perfect data would change that. It would actually get more dollars flowing in the direction. But it's an important one to realize that the data is out there, and that it is more than a data conversation that needs to shift the change of tides right now. Time has flown. We're almost at the end. As I knew it was going to happen, and we haven't gotten to all the good questions. I want to launch the last poll. I told you, speaking of data collection, I got one more question that we are going to ask up as I get ready to ask our incredible panel, who've been so gracious with their time and insights and inspiring all of us today. What is, to our entrepreneurs, keeping you up at night right now? Again, for those of you who don't know, this is our way of the incredible program team at the center turning around and making sure we're putting forward the conversations, the connections, the insights, the programs that will make a difference to what your struggles are right now. So you will see this data being reflected in the next 6 to 8 weeks with the programs that are being offered for free by the center. So thank you for giving us your transparency and honesty around what your challenges are. We will take that, we will interpret that, and we will make sure that those programs are showing up in the next couple of months. But for the panel here, final question to ask you. All of you are focused on really driving positive social change. What kind of data and measurement strategies do you think are really necessary right now to take existing problem states and create future outcomes that are changing those dynamics? I'm not going to put anyone on the spot to answer that question off the top. Instead, I'll just let you all choose who goes first, and we're going around to everyone today. Of course, she says that, and then I'm going to have to put somebody on the spot because nobody wants to go first. They're all so polite. Meg, that smile, it got me going. You're up first.
Oh, it's like, not that I don't have an answer. It's like I've got 7 answers. There's so much work to be done. And I think to Jill's point, this is true, that we have to figure out ways to show that we're not rational actors, right? And how do we sort of capture and share data that are different than what we're currently, just more of the same. Here's the problem, here's the problem, here's the gap, et cetera, without coming up with more creative ways to capture, what's going on in these relationships, or how do we, how do we demonstrate that, yeah, there are biases in the system, that we often don't make decisions about things like investment on a rational basis, that what are these other factors that are creeping into our decision making, and how do we sort of surface and connect those so that we can actually get to effective solutions. So I think that area, that space is really interesting to me. Tips more into the social science side, which also I think we have a lot maybe to offer here as well. So something in that area I think would be really exciting.
Love it. All right, who's next?
Also, we don't look at this in the sense of social impact. This is economic impact, right? There are investors that are missing out on returns. There are founders that are missing out on the opportunity to grow substantial businesses. There are small business owners that are missing out on the opportunity to create more income, jobs, and wealth in the communities in which they exist. So, I think we really have to look at this from an economic impact perspective, and what we're losing as a whole. Now, that might bring a few more people into the fold who previously, were not convinced of the current data that exists. But I think that we, again, have to make sure that we're continuing to push on where the problem is. And so looking at and studying and doing more data around why people make the investments that they make. So the question is not why can't the Black founders get capital? It's why are you investors who are currently investing? Why are you investing in the companies in which you are investing? And I think doing more data, doing more research, and producing more data there could actually produce some deeper insights that help people to then figure out, yeah, maybe how I've been thinking about this is not actually the right way, or just kind of uncovers what many of us know and understand to be the bias.
I think I can build off that. I know we're almost at time. I mean, I think Jill is absolutely spot on that, capital holders don't want to make bad investments. And there's some really good investments that they're missing out on when it comes to BIPOC women and non-binary folks. And I think one thing to go to the future state is for resource holders to really reflect on what kind of questions they're asking and who they're asking them. Are they asking prevention questions or promotion questions? What we've seen a lot of times is with our BIPOC, Black and Brown entrepreneurs, there's a lot of prevention questions. To be really risk averse. They don't want to invest in that. But for white male counterparts, a lot of promotion. Oh, what's the future going to be? What can we do? And having resource holders really reflect, what kind of questions are you asking? And where is the bias coming in on that?
Here's to promotion for sure. This has just been such an honor, such a treat, all of you. I deeply appreciate Terry. Any final thoughts? I know you have so many. I feel like we didn't get all the wisdoms that I wanted to, but this hopefully will not be our last chat with this group together for sure. For those of you who have seen, we've got some upcoming events, programs that we'd love to invite you, welcome you to. Your thoughts on this as far as where we take it next are always gratefully appreciated. So if there's any of the content today that you'd like to dig deeper into with us, please share that feedback back with us, and we will absolutely take that on and make sure that we come back with a part 2. Data's not going away anytime soon from our intentions or from the opportunity set. So thank you again to our sponsors, our donors, and each and every one Barnaby for joining. It's been a treat. And until next time, take care and be well. Bye-bye.